I was just about to throw away this stuff when I thought, maybe I can make something good out of it. Hey everybody, it's Chris from Family Geekery, and a couple weeks ago I put out a video where I took the good parts out of this computer, which was a mining PC that I built a long time ago for a friend, and I took out the GPU and the power supply, and I built him a new streaming computer. So I'll put a link down in the description below of that video, but I got these parts left over here, and I thought this is probably something I'd just toss, get rid of it. But after I thought about it, I thought it might still have a little bit of life left into it. So I wanted to see how cheap I could build a gaming PC out of these parts. So I thought maybe setting a target price at around $100 worth of parts to add with what I had left here would be a good target to maybe make something that can play some modern games at low res, maybe some, Minecraft, Fortnite. Probably not going to be doing any kind of Call of Duty at 4K, but we'll still get some life out of it, and maybe find some kid locally here that needs a computer or wants a computer, and get them into it for cheap. So what we're starting with here is this Acer motherboard, and this came out of an Acer, like just a desktop, like a cheap home PC from years and years and years ago. And it's got a i3, I think it's 2130. And here it had 6 gigs of RAM, and it is a micro ATX format, so it does fit in a regular case. Only problem is no I/O shield, because when this came out of the old case, the case was just pre-drilled with the holes for this motherboard, so there was no, standard I/O shield. It was just holes in a sheet metal. So it's going to be ugly on the back side, but we're going to find a nicer looking case. We're going to find some parts to go with it, keep it on a budget, and see what we come up with. So first things first, let's get this motherboard out of this old case. This is not a case I'm going to keep for anything, so it's going to be tossed. We're going to clean this up, get all the dust off of it, probably take this fan shroud off, and see if we can just use the standard fan. I've got some other Intel fans that I can use if this one doesn't look like it's going to be good enough, but I think once we take it and clean it up, I think it should be fine. Alright, so I got the motherboard out, and I still have to clean it up, but I wanted to show you this fan shroud here. So originally in the PC, there's probably some, little metal grating on the outside of the case that would mate right up to this and let the fan kind of vent in or out of there, and that's why they use these things. But I took this off. There's just 4 clips that hold it on, and what I found was it's actually 3 pieces. So the shroud was on the fan was on the heat sink, and it's going to make it easier to clean, so I'll be able to clean these up. If I can't get these as clean as I want, like I said, I'll find another fan sitting around here somewhere. But let me go take this into the other room where I've got my blower, and I'll blow off all this dust and see how clean we can get it. Alright, so it cleaned up a little better than I thought. It's actually not too bad. So we got the motherboard out, got it cleaned up, got one little screw here that, since the standoffs on these cases are always threaded the same direction as the screws, you always run the risk of any time you try to take a screw out, that it's going to take the standoff out instead. So that's what we got here, which is why you always keep a pair of needle nose pliers handy. Just grab onto that bad boy, and then there you go. This is always frustrating when it's still inside the case and you've got other things keeping it in, but you can usually, if the case is big enough, you can usually slip this underneath the motherboard and grab onto the standoff and take it off. So we've got it all apart now. Let's take a look at some of the parts that I found to make this thing complete again. So like I said, this has an i3 2130, which is a very low-end, PC CPU. So I just happen to have lying around here an i5 2550K. So this is the same generation, but it's a 4-core 4-thread instead of a 2-core 2-core 4-thread. So it's going to give it a little bit more speed, and I would literally use this for nothing else. So I'm going to go ahead and swap this out and give it a tiny bit of boost there. I'm going to take out the 3 sticks of 2 GB RAM. I've got this kit here that I'm pretty sure is a working kit of 16 gig DDR3, and I think I paid like $20 for it. So this is going to go in there. Let's see if that works. I've got a 500 gig SSD. I get these things for like $30 at Micro Center. You can get them on Amazon for about the same price. So that's going to give it 500 gigs, which should definitely put a couple games on it at least. And then let's look at the power supply. So when I took the power supply out of the other computer, the mining computer, that power supply went into the new computer, and the new computer, if you watch that video, had a power supply in it already, and I took that out. So that was just sitting here, and it's a 600 watt power supply, which is going to be too much for what we need here. So I've actually had this open box here, 430 watt power supply, and again, it's something that I would never use for anything else, just happen to have it. So that's going to give more than enough juice to the computer, because we're going to be using a lower end GPU. This is a GTX 1050 Ti, which a couple years ago was really nice. Now it's obviously several generations old, but it's nice because it doesn't need any power input. So it doesn't need a PCIe power input, which lets us use a lower end or cheaper or less power supply. So all these parts put together are going to be a good balance. You don't want to put a $800 GPU in a $100 computer, and you don't want to put a $300 CPU along with a $50 GPU. So keeping everything balanced is really the key to making this the best bang for the buck. Alright, now to package all this stuff up, I've got a case that's brand new in the box, and I got it for super cheap from a local guy here that's always selling me stuff, and it's right over there, but I've never honestly looked at it, so I don't know what it looks like. I just know that it should be complete, and it was really cheap, and it should be a lot better looking than what we took this stuff out of. So I'll grab that when the time comes, but for right now we're going to start working on populating the board here and just testing everything out before we throw it inside the case. Alright, so I popped the RAM out. I'm pretty sure that was the original RAM that came with the Acer system. I'm not sure why they use 3 2 GB sticks. I guess just to make it sound like more than 4 gig, but they didn't want to give you a full 8 gig. But for whatever reason, it's gone. Next step, I'm going to take this heatsink off of the CPU, and then we're going to clean that CPU up with some trusty rubbing alcohol and my trusty Angel Soft toilet paper. So let's go ahead and take this thing off, and we'll swap out the new CPU. Alright, so what I usually do with these are like spring-loaded screws, is I back them up until you hear it kind of pop, and that means that the threads have completely freed themselves from whatever it's screwed into. So once you get all 4 of those popped, then you just want to kind of give it a little wiggle to make sure that you're not ripping the whole, if the thermal compound is stuck really hard to the CPU and you just start pulling up, you might rip that CPU out of the socket or do some damage. So just kind of wiggle it back and forth a little bit to make sure that you break that connection, and then there it is. So because there's no fan, the fan's over here, I didn't have to worry about the cable being still attached. Sometimes you pull it off and the cable's still attached and you bring the motherboard with you. But let's go ahead and clean this up and clean that up, and I'll swap out the CPUs. Alright, so I got 10 years worth of thermal compound off of the heatsink here, and when you do this one's actually pretty clean, but when you clean off a CPU that's still in the socket, I like to use what I call the kitchen sweep the kitchen method. If you're sweeping the kitchen, you kind of go around all the corners and bring all the dirt into the middle. So that's what I like to do, is kind of work the way around the outside into the inside. That way, if you just kind of wipe it like this, you may get some of the thermal compound outside of the socket, and then it gets inside here and it gets on the motherboard. And if it gets underneath the CPU, then you got a real problem there. So let me go ahead and get this little bit of junk off here. Nice and shiny. So let's lift that up and replace it out. So you want to see where your gold triangle is, your little keyed spot here is, and match it up with the motherboard. Luckily, we've also got these indentions in here on these Intel CPUs, which help us figure out which way they're supposed to go. And this is the point where you don't want to touch any of that stuff, obviously. Give it a little wiggle to make sure it's seated in there and centered, and then we can send this clamp back down. There we go. Alright, with the new CPU in there, I got a little bead of new thermal compound in there, and I'm ready to send this guy back on top. So you try to center it up and make sure all 4 screws are kind of sitting in there, and then hold a little pressure down so it doesn't move. I like to try to get a couple threads in everywhere before I send it all the way down. Then just work your way around. And these spring-loaded ones will usually go all the way down until they seat, to let you know that you've gone down far enough, so you don't have to worry about how tight and really torque those things down. You just get them to where the springs are bottomed out and it's nice and secure. So before we put the fan back on, I'm going to go ahead and take care of the RAM. So like I said, this is should be a 2x8 DDR3 kit. So we're going to take these, line them up with the offsets. We're going to go in the blue channel here. And anytime you're dealing with what's probably 10 or 12-year-old plastic, you always be somewhat gentle with it. Those seem to snap in just fine. So let's get the fan back on, and we're probably ready to test fire this thing up and check out the BIOS. Alright, so that fan just literally clipped right on top of these 4 posts, nice and easy. So now, to get this thing to boot up, I'm going to add the power supply. So the main power supply connector here, the CPU power supply connector there, and then I should be able to boot it up without any graphics card in there, since this is an Intel and it's not one of the Intel F processors. So let me get a couple things hooked up and get a test monitor out here, and we'll see if we can get this thing to post. Alright, so I got the power supply plugged in, got everything ready to go, got a keyboard and a monitor plugged in, and I ran into a little problem, but it's okay because I learned something today. So I'm going to show you what the problem was, and then I'll show you what the solution is. So when we turn on the power supply and boot this thing up, the monitor never comes to life, and you start hearing some beeping. So those are just post beep codes, and I looked up the post beep codes. It's 1 long and 2 short, and it said one of the possibilities might be a video RAM issue. Now, I'd thought this would have integrated graphics, but as it turns out, this particular i5 2550K does not have integrated graphics. So it's saying it doesn't see any video card, and it's exactly right. So let me turn this off. I'm going to pop in just my little test video card, and we'll see if we can get to post. Alright, so I've got the motherboard on this static bag here, and I've got a couple of these Rubbermaids I always use underneath there just to prop it up a little bit off the table, just enough to get this video card in here. So this is my trusty video card that I use to post just about every computer I build, and let's go ahead and turn it on now. Now we're hoping that beep has gone away, and we hope to see something up on the monitor. And there we go. Gateway. So I forgot that I had taken this out of a gateway, and I missed the BIOS screen here. But this must have come out of an old gateway machine, and probably during the times that they were involved with Acer. And there we go. Now we're in BIOS. Let me go ahead and bring this screen up a little bit. And you can see the i5 2550K running at 3.4 gigahertz. It sees all 16 gigs of memory, so that's good. And I think we're ready to go. The BIOS date is obviously messed up because I had reset the BIOS when I heard those beeps. I was wondering if there was some issue that I had introduced into it by changing out the RAM or something. So we'll change that later. Now at this point, what I usually do is I usually go ahead and hook up, like a SATA cable with a SATA hard drive, if that's what I'm going to use, and go ahead and install Windows and everything. And I usually do that to get Windows installed and all updated before I put this in a case, but we're just going to go ahead and get this thing in a case and worry about Windows later. Now, if you've noticed this fan back here, I plugged this in just into one of the fan headers, just because sometimes these OEM motherboards that are made by, let's say, in this case, Gateway or Acer, sometimes they have certain ports on the motherboard that have to be plugged in or it's going to throw up a code. And they think, hey, if something happened and the fan broke, it wants to put an error code up on here so that they know, hey, don't run this computer for too long without the fan running. So I plugged that in just to make sure that the beeping wasn't caused by that. So we'll go ahead and shut this down and start taking a look at the case. Alright, so here's what I got. This Raid Max ARGB LED strip Galaxy case, and it is sealed up top here. So I gotta assume everything's in there. Like I said, I got this from a friend for super cheap, and I'm just gonna go ahead and guess that it's in there. It looks like it's got a glass side, probably plastic side, and there's not going to be anything that we can plug this ARGB into. There's no ARGB headers on this old motherboard, but at least it's a lot better than what we had it in. So let's crack this thing open and see what's inside. Alright, here it is. Pardon the extreme close-up here, but the front here you can see some LEDs inside here, and it's got like a mirrored effect. So hopefully we can at least get them to show some kind of color even without the motherboard header. But it feels like the front of this is actually glass, and then the side window here, which is wrapped with plastic both on the inside and the outside, feels like this is plastic, which is what I expected for how light it was. The box is pretty lightweight, but it looks like everything's here, and let's go ahead and open this up and start putting some parts in it. Alright, I got the side panel off, and yes, it was acrylic, but everything else is nice. This is a nice case for what I paid for it, and I think we're going to luck out. I think there's going to be a RGB controller in here, and we're going to be able to use the reset switch to control those lights on the front instead of having to use software. That's always a bonus. So let me go ahead and get the back panel taken off here. I'm going to fit the motherboard on there and start wiring some stuff up. Alright, might have spoke a little too soon on this case. A couple issues, couple things that I would definitely change about it, but I think it's showing its age. I think it's been around for a while. And let me show you what I mean. We've got this clear area up here that's definitely made for mounting some fans, but the front panel that snaps in front is completely sealed, and it's completely sealed with this, which is probably the mirror, which makes this whole one big unit here with all the front I/O cables in it. There's just no way you're going to put fans in here. If you put a fan up in here, it would be drawing air from nowhere I don't think there'd be enough air that would seep in between the seam to do that. So I looked at the instruction sheet, because that's what you do when you're confused about stuff, and it says fan installation, 1 fan on the back. Okay, so I figured we've got nothing in here that's going to be creating a ton of heat, so 1 fan venting out the back is going to be fine. But then I look at it and it's 80 millimeter. It's not even the standard 120 that we use today. So luckily I have sitting around here, back from when I was building computers probably in the late 90s, early 2000s, an 80 millimeter fan, which is probably the last time I've used one this size. So at least I've got a fan to put on there. That'll be fine. Next thing I noticed is we've got this nice basement area, right? You put your power supply in here and it hides all the cables, but there's no feed through up top here for the ATX connector. So the power cable that's going to come up there. So it's either going to have to come out through here and go across the motherboard, or it can go out the back and come up here, but I don't think it's going to be long enough. Usually those are just long enough to go straight up here and plug right into the board. So I'm probably going to have to bring it up here and just kind of string it across the motherboard, which will be fine. It's I might have to go either above or below the only card that we'll have in here will be the GPU. So we'll have to tuck it in there somehow. So let me get the standoffs in the right location for this motherboard and start mounting some stuff. Alright, so I added 2 standoffs, one here and one up top here for the motherboard. And if you've watched me build computers before, you know I like to always look in the included screws, which I keep on my trusty Rubbermaid lid, and find the ones that go in here before we actually start mounting anything. It just makes it a lot easier. So it's usually these little Phillips heads that have the little rounded off top. So I'm just going to take one of those and try it out in here. Make sure it goes all the way down without cross threading and all the way back up. So looks like those are the ones. So now I can start mounting the motherboard. The good news is I don't have an I/O plate to forget to put in first, because that's always a risk that you have, forgetting to put that in. But we got no I/O plate at all, so let's go ahead and drop this motherboard in. Alright, so this was the easiest motherboard installation I've had in a while, because I didn't have to line anything up. I just dropped it in there, put the screws in, everything's good to go. Nothing screams I'm a gaming PC like a nice shiny green motherboard, but it's going to do the job. So let's go ahead and take care of the power supply next. So I'm going to mount the power supply and route the 2 main cables that we're going to need for the motherboard, and then we'll start thinking about the hard drive. Alright, we got the power supply mounted in here. I've got the main connector right here. There's a little bit of a bend to it, but I'm going to put a tie wrap on the back here just to give it some strain relief so it's not pulling on that connector. The ATX connector was actually long enough just to get up here and basically banjo string all the way over to the connector. So I was able to get it up here and hide it. And since it's kind of dark and shaded up there, it's going to be kind of hidden away, which is also nice because I put the fan on and kind of hid that cable back up there too. The fan came with some really nice silver screws to mount it, just like they would back in the 90s. But I've got plenty of black screws, so I put some black screws on there just to make it a little bit prettier. Not that this thing is going to be beautiful or anything, but just had them around, so might as well use it. So what's next? We got to get the I/O stuff here, which was all just kind of poking through the front here. I think we're going to be able to get it through a back channel and hide most of the cables in the back. It's not a super big back tray in the back, but I think we can get most of these cables back there and then kind of fish them through to hook up to the front I/O and to the USB and the audio. So we'll get that taken care of. Then we got to get a SATA cable hooked up and hook up some power to a SATA drive. So the SATA drive looks like you can mount them here, but there is right underneath here some little trays that slide out, and they slide out the front. That's not what I usually like, but I don't think we're going to have to get in and out of this thing very often, so I'll go ahead and get the hard drive hidden down underneath there, and then I'll check back when I get a couple things done. Alright, I think almost everything wired up here. Let me show you what I found. I was able to get most of the cables from the front I/O here poked out the side here, except for one. There's a really fat USB 3, which there is a USB 3 port up top here, but we're not going to be able to use that. But I'll show you what I did with that in the front in just a second. So that one just wouldn't come out here. This wouldn't close with that one poking through here, so I had to poke that a different way. So those come in here. Most of this is the front I/O stuff. So we got the USB and the HD audio running to the front of the motherboard, and then all the power switch, power light, and stuff like that. The reset switch is actually stays in here, and it's actually pre-wired to, I think, the controller for the RGB lights. So the reset switch is going to be able to control the lights, I think. I went ahead and put the hard drive back here. The trays underneath here were more suitable for the 3.5-inch drives. So this one I just popped back in here, and it was easier to fit the SATA cable anyways. This guy here, I hate how they put these power connectors in the middle like this in line, because it just makes it hard to stick someplace, but I think I'm going to be able to just poke this in here when I put the back lid on. Everything else is pretty well cable managed. Not super pretty, but at least it's all in place. So let's put the door back on this and flip this around. I'll show you what we ended up with in the front. Alright, look at this beauty. So I took the front I/O. Here's all the switches and lights going right to this connector. And then I've got the HD audio over here, and the USB coming up here. That was on one single cable coming from underneath here, which is good. And then this fat USB 3 cable, which has a standard USB 3 connector on it, which obviously doesn't exist on this board, had a pigtail off of it, which was a standard USB connector. So I had plenty of USB connectors on the main board here, so I went ahead and plugged one in. And I'm hoping that just takes the blue connector that's up top here and just makes it a USB 2, so that if someone does plug something in, it's not just a dead port. So that's hopefully what it's going to do, and if so, that's handy. Got the SATA cable plugged in here and tucked back, and I think we are good to go. I'm just going to open up another one of these bays here and pop in the GPU, and I think we're ready to test fire this bad boy. Alright, GPU is plugged in. I've got the monitor plugged in, the power supply hooked up, got a mouse and keyboard attached. I'm going to go ahead and give this guy a test boot here. And everything's up and running. You can see the lights here. We'll take a look at the front in a second. You can hear this silly fan buzzing. We'll check that out. And it's reading a USB boot drive. So we got Windows booting up, getting ready to install. So let me get Windows thrown on here. I'll figure out what's buzzing over here somewhere, and then I'll be back to give you the grand reveal. Alright, we got Windows installed, and miraculously Device Manager only has one thing that it hasn't recognized yet, so I'm going to let the Windows updates go through and see if that catches everything. If not, then I'll go to Gateway's site, if there is still a Gateway site, and see if I can find a driver for this. But it sounds like the GPU is actually what's rattling a little bit, so I'll figure that out once we get Windows up and installed, and I'll check back with you in just a minute. Alright, I got Windows all up and it's all updated, and here's the front. You can see that kind of infinity mirror type display. It looks pretty cool. And then up top here, the reset button is actually controlling that. So it's got, I think, like a dozen or so different styles that it will cycle through. So that's pretty nifty. And the fan isn't buzzing as much as it was before, but I did find a fan right here, an extra one, in case I do need to replace that out. I can swap that out. But so far so good. So let's talk about the total cost approximation, and then we'll figure out how we're gonna benchmark this thing or test this thing. So the case, like I said, it was about $10. I got it for $10 or $15. The GPU is probably the most expensive. That was probably around $50 is what I paid for that. The hard drive was about $30 for that 500 gig SSD. The RAM was about $20. So we're sitting at about $110 or so out of pocket. Like I said, the motherboard, the power supply, the CPU, all of that was kind of left over from that other build that I converted. So about $110 out of pocket. So not too bad. I almost hit the magic $100 budget target. But in this economy, 110 bucks isn't bad. So let's see how we can test this thing out. All right, so I got rid of the small monitor and put on this little 1080p monitor so we can get the resolution all the way up. And I loaded up some Fortnite. Now this is just creative mode and this is in performance mode, but we're getting a crazy amount, 130, 140 frames per second, and it jumps up over 200. Again, this is just solo mode, so I don't have other people in here, but it's playing pretty smooth. And even when I had it set in like regular DirectX mode, not performance mode, I was getting 70 to 80 FPS on 1080p, and this is 1080p medium, so not bad, considering this is, right now I built something cheaper than an Xbox, and I'm getting better than 60 frames per second, so pretty happy about that. Now I'm not a big-time Fortnite player, so I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know how it looks, but it seems to be playing pretty smooth to me. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. I'm pretty happy with the computer and how it turned out, for considering I didn't put a whole lot of money into it, and it seems to be playing a game just fine. Now I've built hundreds, if not thousands, of computers over the last 25 years, and it's always fun, but I can tell you it's a lot easier when I don't have to deal with this silly camera and contorting myself all around it to try to put the parts in. So if you appreciate my hard work in this effort, go ahead and give me that thumbs up. I appreciate it a lot. And if you want to see more stuff like this, I got plenty of more parts to do and more computers to build, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a beat. But let me know in those comments below, what do you think about this computer? What do you think I could have changed? What would have made it better? And let me know if you have any questions about it. But thank you as always for watching, and until next time, peace out and geek out.